is now in bed with the left, and America First patriots are unsure these days what businesses share with, pro-American traditional values. And now we find out that JP Morgan Chase Bank knowingly let sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein use his bank accounts to fund his illicit activities. That's what's being reported for years, but then canceling the accounts supposedly of some conservative political activists. Right. That's what's being reported.
Right. Well, it happened to me, not with them, but with another big bank. But there are groups out there who are ranking companies according to their values. One group called the 1792 Exchange rank companies on risk of canceling accounts over political, religious beliefs, things like that. And they are tracking the woke companies so that you don't have to, which is so great. I've been begging for this to happen for a long time. So that's exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. Someone who else has been doing this is Terry Sawchuk. He joins us now. He's the chairman of Sawchuk Wealth. Good to see you again, Terry. This report that Jeffrey Epstein was protected while conservatives were targeted by JP Morgan Chase. I mean, that's pretty outrageous.
It's not surprising. I mean, if you saw the Twitter files, you know that the conservatives have been targeted by everybody. So this is, we've talked about this before, Miranda. This is the slippery slope, because in the end, if we get, and I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but all paths lead to a central bank digital currency. And this is kind of a glimpse of where they want to go, because they'll be able to program it and block anybody out. And if they control the money, they control everything.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I'm so glad, by the way, there are lists out there of pro-America companies. I was dying for, businesses that were bad about masks, that were just crazy about that during COVID or other things, to all be published so that we could know what businesses we could support. Patriots want to know, who are the pro-American businesses, right? I mean, that's what it really comes down to. Who can they count on to be pro-America? It's not really about politics. It's really just about the survival of our country. So what other sorts of lists are out there? What other sorts of businesses can we look to be held accountable and commended when they err on the side of freedom?
Well, there's a lot going on here. So the 1792 org is great. I actually use those to screen out woke companies for the ones that we look to avoid so that we don't invest in those. There's another website called Cancel This Company, which is essentially the same concept. And, what's really kind of ironic, and it's just the world that we live in right now, but if you really want to know who's behind all this, if you look at every major company, okay, particularly in the S&P 500, and you look at the top 2 shareholders of those companies, they are almost always Vanguard and BlackRock, okay? And Vanguard and BlackRock are essentially responsible for this woke ideology. They control the board of directors in many instances and are pushing, all this DEI and all the other stuff. And they're the ones who control the media companies. They control the pharmaceutical companies. Top 3 pharmaceutical companies, guess what? Biggest 2 shareholders, Vanguard, BlackRock. It all comes back to those 2 companies.
Yeah, follow the money, like we always say.
Always. So, Terry, retirement account balances and 401k plans lost nearly 1/4 of their value last year. This according to an analysis by Fidelity. And on top of that, nearly half of retirees expect to outlive their savings. That is scary. But how do you have this balance here where, again, you can invest your money wisely, but then have it go towards companies that actually support your values? It's hard because you want your money to grow, but you don't want it to go towards companies that are pushing things like critical race theory or transitioning among teenagers, stuff that you don't support. How do you balance that out?
It's challenging, and one of the reasons that, so if you look at the total assets combined between BlackRock and Vanguard, it's somewhere between 10 and 15 trillion dollars. Okay, so they literally control as much money as more than half of the United States GDP. And if you throw State Street in there, now they're equal to 100% of GDP. So one of the things that they do And this is a brilliant business plan on their part, but they run these index funds and these target funds, which in many cases are the only option that you have inside your 401k plan. So in some instances, there's nothing you can do about it. But if you're in a 401k plan that gives you options, my advice would be to avoid BlackRock, avoid Vanguard if you want to undermine, or at least not give them money to undermine your values, right? And then outside of that, you have to look to other companies, and there's tons of them out there, but you definitely want to stay away from those. And by the way, J.P. Morgan Chase, not only did they debanked Kanye West, right? Although it was okay to do business with Jeffrey Epstein. And you know who the other guy is that's kind of like Jeffrey Epstein, but in the financial world? It's Sam Bankman-Fried. He is very well connected, tied to crypto, and wait until you see all of the things that come out around that, because he is worse in some ways than Epstein was. Not in what he did with, what Epstein did was horrible, but I'm just talking about the financial end of it.
Yeah. So, well, Citibank did it to me, actually, and it was just really unbelievable to me. And then when I started asking other America First friends of mine, it turns out Citibank did it to a lot of people during the RNC. I believe it was in 2020. But anyway, I guess it makes me think, though, for example, in the psychology industry, my industry, I know there's so much pressure on psychologists to, never help someone who might, a young person who thinks they might be transitioning because the local licensing agencies are threatening the licenses of those who will counsel someone to do anything except for take the woke perspective. I'm hearing, of course, from doctors all the time, don't prescribe ivermectin, et cetera, or you might lose your license. And some doctors I know have lost their licenses. So my question to you is, how much pressure is there in the finance and wealth management industry to go woke?
It depends on where you're at. As an independent, nobody's putting any pressure on me. But if you work for J.P. Morgan Chase, if you work for Bank of America, if you work for UBS, yeah, there's going to be pressure. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. And by the way, they did the same thing to Mike Lindell at Minnesota Bank and Trust. They completely debanked him and asked him to go someplace else. This is a slippery slope, right? And by the way, all goes back to Marxist ideology that if you look at 1930s Germany and even Italy before that, it's this corporatist sort of fascist combination where the government and these big corporations work together, and the corporations become the enforcement arm, and they're out there doing things that the government themselves can't do, right? Larry Fink at BlackRock can do all kinds of things that the Biden administration doesn't have the political mandate to do. And it's all tied together, and they use language as a weapon to justify this. And it sounds so innocuous that you would say, boy, that sounds like something that we should be doing. But then when you look at where it all leads, it's not good. It's scary. And this runs very, very deep.
Yeah, and there are a lot of real Americans that are watching this show, as you know, right? There's this silence. They're still afraid to speak up about their values, that they're going to lose their job, lose their license, like Gina mentioned, and they're afraid. I mean, we've seen what happened with Mike Lindell. We saw what happened with Goya. I mean, there's a multitude of companies, right? You get deplatformed, you get taken out of this business, Bed Bath & Beyond, you name it. So what can real Americans in the short time that we have remaining, who, again, want to invest their money into businesses that support their values, what's the biggest piece of advice you would have for them? Last 45 seconds to you, sir.
Sure. No, I think 1792 is great, because not only do they provide a list, but they rank them so you can actually sort it from companies that are most likely to cancel all the way down, right? And PayPal did this. PayPal was going to steal $2,500 of their customers' money if they thought that they were spreading misinformation online, right? Jordan Peterson basically got threatened, and his medical licenses were threatened in Canada for having this ideology. So it comes back to, it's really interesting. We learned all this because Elon Musk bought Twitter. Had he not bought Twitter, we would have not known about how the apparatus works. And I actually think the pendulum is now starting to swing the other way. The Missouri versus Biden lawsuit, the states that are kicking BlackRock and Vanguard out of the pension plans.
Yeah.
I mean, what you're doing is God's work here, because we are getting the pendulum to swing the other way.
Well, we can certainly hope so. Terry Sawchuk, as always.